Have you ever had a time in your life when you looked at yourself and you said, why am I the way I am? Anybody? Have you ever said, why did I just say that? Why did I just react that way? I know that that's not the truth. Why am I pissed off? All the time. Why? Do you ever ask yourself those questions? Why is my life like this again? Anybody ever have that happen? How did I land here again? At this age? In this world? I don't have any answer for you. Actually, that is so not the truth. I have an answer for you. We are creatures of habit. We are creatures of habit, and the habit becomes so ingrained that we don't even know how it got there, why it's there, what we meant to begin with, and yet that's how we react. Anybody have that happen in their life? Yes, exactly. Like, for instance, where you sit in church. How many of you are sitting kind of where you usually sit in church? Creatures of habit. It's so confusing for me when any of you move. Really. I get up here, I'm like, what is Terry Terrell doing over here? He sits there, which is where he is today. If these two men ever move from here, I will be lost directionally. Really. Remember those two guys in the Muppets? Every Sunday. Except they stand for two people who hold the truth for me, not the grouchiness. Yes. So we are creatures of habit. Let's just admit it, yes? Okay. So I woke up this morning. I went to bed last night really early. It was unbelievable. It was like 8:30 and Kevin was falling asleep. I was like, how old are we? But he fell asleep at like 8:30. I finished watching TV at 9 o'clock and I went, let's go to bed. And he wakes up and he goes, it's too early. I was like, you've been sleeping already. What's the point? So let's break this habit of staying up late. We were asleep. He was asleep at 9. I was asleep at 10. And we got all these hours of sleep. We're like really rejuvenated today. And, thank you. And while I was alone for the hour while Kevin was sleeping, I was working on this talk. And I literally went to bed with my head swimming in ideas of this talk. So when I woke up this morning at like 5:30, 6 o'clock, I tweeted. I said, I want to send a tweet out today. For those of you who don't know what that is, I'm not telling you. It's my Twitter account, and I tweet a little something that goes out to whoever's listening to my tweets. And so it said, and I also Facebooked it for those I missed on the tweet world. So this is what I wrote. Habits are thoughts that think they have control. Curious how we give our power away without even knowing it. Habits are thoughts that think they have control. So we have thoughts that we are not conscious of thinking. Are you aware of that? We have thoughts that we are not conscious that we're aware of thinking. And we think it's just because it's who we are. Well, that's just the way I think. That's not the truth. That's not true. It's what we've agreed to think so far. We have made agreements with our mind to think something and then allow it to turn into a habit, and now that's just on autopilot. We keep going, but those thoughts keep coming. Do you ever have that happen to you in your life? And they show up and you're like, why was I just thinking that? All habits begin as a conscious choice. Now just think about that for a minute. Every single one of your habits begin as a conscious choice. Somewhere along the line, you and I made an agreement to think a certain way, or to act a certain way, or to react a certain way, and eventually it becomes a habit. Once the habit appears, we're hypnotized into thinking that this is just our way of living. And we are under its spell, the habit's spell. And so we've relinquished control over our minds. Today, I would like to take back the conscious control of each and every mind in this room and give it back to the person who owns it. What do you think? Wouldn't you like that? Wouldn't you like to leave here today completely absolved of your habits? And I mean good, bad, and indifferent, by the way. I mean all habits. So that no longer do you go through life as an unconscious thinker, but you get to choose each moment, you get to decide each moment, do I want to do this? Do I want to think this? Do I want to act this way? Wouldn't that be great? Every single moment. It's so funny, I'm only hearing half of you answer me. The other half saying he's talking too fast. So, I have a question. How many of you have habits that you are aware of? That's okay. Does anybody think they have habits that they're not aware of, or think they don't have habits? Okay, good. Okay, one person. Okay. Now the question was, how many of you have habits that you're not aware of? So that just means you're not aware of them. Okay. So, how many of you have addictions that you are aware of? Okay, good. I want to talk first about the difference between a habit and an addiction. They are both behavior patterns. They are both things that we repeat frequently. They are things that have become automatic. And they are both, and this is under both's definition, independent of conscious choice. Now just think about that. Independent of conscious choice. So when I'm talking about habits this morning, I am including addictions. But here's what I'm not doing. I'm not making something good bad and something out of my control and in my control. Because what I am understanding is that I have a choice over all of it. And the problem is that we are living in a world that believes there are certain things we don't have choices over. So I'd like to get rid of the idea today that an addiction is a habit that is out of my control. Now, I know I don't want to stand in the face, I don't want to stand in the way of or go against anything in a 12-step program, but what I would ask you to do today, if you are in a 12-step program, is to release all of that from your mind and listen with a new mind, not a mind that has been trained by any program. So just keep your mind open today if that is your issue or if that's going on in your life. Because right now, habit, addiction, all the same thing. And we're going to look at this in a very impersonal way. Are you okay with that? Yes. Great, okay. So habits. Thoughts that think they have control. We actually talk about habits in our world as though they are living, breathing entities. We actually think that the habits that are in our world are something that has a hold over us. Thoughts that think they're in control. Now, the very thought of that, thoughts that think, thoughts do not think. Thoughts are thunk. Thoughts can't think. You and I think. So habits tend to have this power over us as though there's an entity involved in it that has some power over us. There is not. A habit, whether it's a habit or go all the way to an addiction, regardless of what scale you put that on, it starts with a conscious thought in the mind. We've created beliefs about these things called habits that empower them to have control over us. Such as, just for example, a belief like, my body needs a cigarette. How many people here have struggled or are struggling with or ever struggled with cigarette problems, cigarette addiction? Okay, so that's about a third of the room. So, this is what it says. A physiologic exposure to a substance, nicotine, that stores reactive memories that remind us of a reward. So at one time, there was a payoff to smoking. And somewhere along the line, someone smoked, had a payoff, and continued to do so until the payoff became a habit, and thus the habit takes a life of its own. And when we try to stop, there's a payoff that we don't want to let go of. And it's in the memory of our DNA. Now here's what's interesting about that. I was thinking about smoking in my family. My mother smoked. My father smoked. Their parents smoked. All of my aunts and uncles smoked. When babies were born in my family in the 50s, when babies were born, mothers were holding their babies, feeding them and smoking at the same time, blowing smoke in their faces. Yes? Anybody else realize that in their life? Right. So that we basically all grew up in a fog. At my house, when all my aunts were together, it was just a fog. I mean, there was just smoke everywhere. You know what's interesting? What I find really interesting? I have 26 cousins. None of us smoke. No, it's not even something to applaud over, because it's a choice. But why? Because our first memory of smoke was asphyxiation. None of us took a puff of a cigarette and went, comforting. No, we were all struggling to breathe. I'm convinced that's why this generation doesn't smoke. The next generation seems to be taking it up again because they're all trying it. And it's just fascinating to watch these habits come and go based on, I sound like Jerry Seinfeld today, come and go. It's interesting to watch these habits come and go based on what the payoff is. And the payoff happens in the beginning. So, a reaction, your original reaction to whatever that payoff was on any habit you have can be changed. Remember, we teach, change your thinking, change your life. Science of Mind teaches conscious thinking. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today. Habits are unconscious thinking. It's an unconscious reaction to something you thought a long time ago. So what would be the best way to deal with my habits? To become aware. To just constantly make a decision every time. So, I have some other questions for you today. What is the habit of your thinking? Because it's not just habits, these things like smoking and biting my nails and all those other things. You have a habit, a habitual way of thinking. How do you habitually think? What is your automatic setting? Are you in the habit of thinking that life is hard? Are you in the habit of thinking that money is difficult to get? Are you in the habit of thinking that there are diseases that you could succumb to? I think we all are. I think those habits are everywhere present and that many of us have picked them up. Habitual thinking stops the flow of infinite spontaneity. When you go on autopilot and you just think the way you normally think about what you normally think about, you are standing in the way, you are stopping the flow of infinite spontaneity. Now notice I said you're stopping the flow, not the presence of it. You're just stopping the flow of it. Every time I go on automatic, I stop being present. Every time I have a reaction, which is exactly like my last reaction, because that's the way I reacted the other time, I am not present to whatever's really happening in that moment. And that goes with everything. You know, I wake up in the morning and I make a protein drink. And I did it again this morning. Does that mean that's a bad thing for me? Absolutely not. Would it be great for me as if every morning I woke up and really checked in to see, what do I really feel like today? Yes, it does. So it's not that I'm saying we should make different choices. I'm saying that we should make conscious choices. We have the ability to think again every single time we think. And I'm not saying that we're going to make different choices. So Ernest Holmes says this. Ernest Holmes says, what is a habit? A habit, he says, is a desire objectified. So what Ernest Holmes says is that habits are desires that have come up in us, and somewhere along the line, the world tells us how this desire is going to be met. And as soon as the world shows us how this desire is going to be met, we develop a habit around it. And the next time the desire comes up, we go into automatic thinking that's how that will be met. Sometimes it's not met very pleasantly, is it? Sometimes we have a desire and we're pushed away. And so every time that desire comes up, we go to a default of, I don't want to feel that. I shouldn't think that thing. I shouldn't go after that. He says, a habit is a desire objectified, the continuous character of one's thought and feelings. So just give yourself a moment today and ask yourself, what is the character of my thoughts and feelings? If someone were going to meet me and give an example of what they thought me to be, thought who I was, would they say, wow, this guy is like so optimistic, so cheerful, so, that's me obviously, so cheerful, so happy, so out of touch. Because very often, those things feel like they're out of touch. And yes, what am I in touch with? Truth, divine principle, which may go very much against the habitual thinking of the universe around me. So what does the world think when they see you? What kind of thoughts come up for people when they meet you? What is the atmosphere of your thinking? Because the atmosphere of your thinking shows me what your habits are. So Ernest Holmes says at the root of all habit is one basic thing, the desire to express life. Doesn't matter what your habit is, there's a desire in you to express life. And he says some people express themselves constructively and some destructively. Now when you watched Alex sing the song, obviously Alex played a character, or maybe there is part of Alex that feels this way, that sometimes he feels trapped. And sometimes he feels like he reacts in a way he doesn't want to react, and he's really just struggling not to react a certain way. And that's why that song moved me so much when he first sang it, and this morning. Because I see the boxed in, the person struggling inside to be their God self. And yet they're on autopilot. And they don't know how to stop themselves from reacting in a way that does not befit who they truly are spiritually. That's why you hear so many people saying, well, I'm off principle. Off principle just means you're not thinking from your highest self. And most likely, you are thinking in a habitual way. So, habits appear to take complete possession of our ability to decide. And that's really the crux of it. You can decide something different, even as it comes up. And for a while, as you're working through this, you've got to be able to be so present that you feel the habit come through you, and you just say, Or you allow it to come through you, and you deal with it as it's coming through you. I love that sometimes when I'm just like, oh God, I'm just so mad right now. I know I shouldn't be. I know that I should really have a better understanding of this. And I do understand it better, but there's this anger in me. And do you ever go through that? Great, just tell me as I'm working through this. So I go through that, and then by the time I talk myself out of it, I understand. And every time I do it, it gets less and less and less until finally I have developed a different type of a habit. I've stepped into my authentic self. Ernest Holmes says, we might well remember always that unless we control thought, it controls us. Unless we control thought, it controls us. He goes on to say, a habit is neither person, place, nor thing. It has no mind of its own, no law to operate within, no will, no intelligence, no thing of itself. So we live in a world that basically tells us something else. One of the things about the 12-step program, there is a line at the top of the 12-step program that says, we understood that we were powerless. And I will paraphrase because I don't know it that well. But we believed that we were powerless over our situations, and that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And somewhere along the line, the word were became are. And I know I had this discussion with Terry Taylor, and he looked it up for me. I said, please look that up, because I think we have evolved into a wrong understanding of this thing called addiction. Bill W. said, we came to believe that we were powerless over blah, blah, blah. Not are. Because it's not a present. Because if I'm actually consciously in mind, I realize that right in this moment, when I'm clear thinking, I may have been, but I don't have to be. Because there is a control in my mind. And frankly, that's why the 12 steps work. A power greater than myself. Meaning, instead of a power greater than my human self that thinks it's separate, my human self that knows it's divine. That's the power. So, it's a mistaken belief that these things in our life have control over us. And we do have the power to take back our lives purely, simply, by taking back our minds. So we're getting to the real belief here. The real true belief. Do I or do I not have the power to think what I choose to think, and therefore create what I choose to create, regardless of any situation or condition or circumstance that is within me or around me? And the answer is yes. A habit is a cluster of beliefs surrounding an issue and embodying itself within something that feels so powerful as to take away our free will. You and I are bigger than any habit that we could ever possibly create in our lives. You know one thing that's a habit? Small thinking. It's very easy to fall into the habit of thinking small. It's very easy to fall into the habit of settling for what life has to offer. It's very easy to fall into the habit of relinquishing our power to circumstances. Living in lack is a habit. It's very easy to fall into a habit of really believing the conditions. Limitation is a habit. Thinking badly about ourselves is a habit. Anybody fall prey to that? Where you just think badly about yourself, you say terrible things about yourself to yourself? How many people? Yeah, that's a habit. You know how you stop that habit? You pay attention to what you're thinking about. You actually recognize what you're thinking. I guarantee you that if we actually had tape recorders that taped what we say and think about ourselves to ourselves, we would listen back appalled. Could you imagine letting other people say to you what you say to yourself? Absolutely not. Don't you dare tell me I'm stupid. Only I can tell me I'm stupid. But that's what we do, don't we? So, questions. What habits exist in your life that are so subtle that they pose as logic? The worst habits are the habits that actually make sense. Because guess what? You're probably proving them every day. And that's just really sad. Think about it. The worst habits are the habits that actually make sense. Posers of logic. It makes logical sense that I am going to have some financial struggles. The economy is tanking. That's logic. How many of us have fallen to that logic? It makes sense that I'm going to get sick every now and then. I mean, there's just disease everywhere. I mean, sometime I'm going to catch a disease. That's just logical. Do you think you could live your whole life without being sick? Yes. But is that logical? No. So it's a habitual thinking that leads me to a logical conclusion that every now and then I will get sick. I don't know how many times I have started to get sick and just said, I don't have time for this, and it leaves. It's like one of those guests. They come to your door, you're like, tonight's not the party, goodbye. How many of those people, when they show up at your house for a party that's next week, do you bring in and have a party for? You don't. Bye-bye. Some of these things just come through me, and I'm shocked myself. So back to Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes says, that which thought has done, thought can undo. Lifelong habits of wrong thinking can be consciously and deliberately neutralized. Merely to abstain from wrong thinking is not enough. There must be active right thinking. It is necessary that we release all thoughts as well as things that clutter up our lives. So, I want to give you the opportunity here this morning, sitting right where you are, to think about it for a second and ask yourself, what habitual thoughts, what habitual beliefs, what habitual ideas do I have in my mind that are cluttering my mind? Because guess what? Habits actually take residence in your mind. They're not those thoughts that just come and go. No, they're the ones that take up residence, and then they actually direct the play of your life. So I want to ask you this morning to really ask yourself, what thoughts, what ideas, what beliefs are inside of my mind that I am really ready to say goodbye to? And just see what comes up, what comes forward. Because as Ernest Holmes says, habits create clutter, and clutter blocks the flow of good. Have you ever had your house when it gets really cluttered? Anybody have a cluttered house right now? I keep raising my hand. I don't have a cluttered house right now. My office is a little cluttered, but you know, when that happens, I always feel a little claustrophobic. And ever try to run out of a room when there's things all over it? Not such a good idea. Habits create clutter. So, whatever came to your mind today, whatever idea came to mind today, today's the day to let it go. Now, I wrote this morning, habits are thoughts that think they have control. Curious how we give our power away without even knowing it. I recognize that there are moments in my life when I just go on autopilot. I'll give you one quick example. We have in our house, our television, the TiVo, the antenna from the television to the box was broken. So for the last 6 months, we have had to, when I want to do something on the TiVo, I have to put my arm around the corner, make sure the door is open, and click it so that the box gets it. We've just lived with this. We just, it's like, we'll get around to it. And so we have become, it's a habit. So, Kevin had it fixed. And the door was closed, and I walked in and opened the door. I knew it was fixed. I opened the door, and I sat down, and I was like, oh, it's already fixed. I closed the door. I went to change it. I went like this. And I'm like, wait, oh, it was fixed. Let me fix that. Constantly. This went on for the last week. I kept going over here going, oh, no, it's here. Oh, no, it's here. And here's what I noticed. When I was conscious, when I actually sat down and was present, I actually sat down and did it. When I was talking to Kevin or the kids or doing something, I would, in the middle of it, just go right back to the habit because I wasn't present. I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing. So when I wrote when I wrote that twit this morning, I said to him, when I wrote the tweet, habits are thoughts that think they have control. Curious how we give our power away without even knowing it. I wrote right after it in big bold print, cure, wake up. True, it was 5:30 in the morning. I was probably talking to myself. But all morning I've been thinking about this. It's time to wake up. It's time for us to wake up. So much so that we obliterate all of our habits and we start over. We go back to that divine default. I believe that it is possible for you and for me today, in this moment, to start over. That when a habit comes up, we're conscious of it and we see it. I see my reaction. And I basically then remind myself who I am, who I truly am. Ernest Holmes says that right where you are, God is. That right where you are is the pure potential of the universe. That right where you are is the possibility of everything you could possibly imagine in your life. And that there is no obstacle present. There is nothing in your life that can stop you, derail you, or even hinder you from moving forward. I know that. I believe that. That is the absolute truth. There is nothing that can stop me from moving into my greatest good. Habits stand in the way, and they have no power whatsoever. Today, in this moment, right here, on this Sunday, you can decide that your habits have no power over you. And in fact, you have the control to get rid of all of them and think again. How? By waking up. By staying fully conscious. By being willing to live a conscious life. Ernest Holmes says, conscious thought is much more powerful than unconscious thought. But, he doesn't say this is mine, but unless you're willing to put the conscious thought into play, the unconscious thought is running the show. So I pose the question to you. Do you want to live unconsciously in the world of habitual thinking? Or would you like to live consciously in the power of your mind? It's an easy answer, isn't it? Good. Namaste.